About 37 million people are currently living with HIV and AIDS in the world, making HIV and AIDS one of the worst pandemics in modern history. HIV is a virus that causes AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome, a condition where the body's immune system is severely impaired.
Because the body becomes defenseless, the person starts getting other diseases that normally they would have been able to fight off. And that now starts to progress towards AIDS. And ultimately what kills people is that syndrome, which is called AIDS, but it's a syndrome of several diseases. For example, TB and other diseases. One just becomes weaker, one becomes more vulnerable, and diseases that they could have fought before, they can no longer fight them, and that is what leads to death.
Before drugs were introduced, the median time from infection to AIDS was taking about 8 to 9 years. Yeah, not very different from what we were saying in other places. But when you get AIDS to death, that's where the problem was mostly in Africa. That was very quick in a few months.
The human body can fight off most viruses, but HIV infects and eventually wipes out the very cells needed to kill it.
And our cells, the CD4, start calming down. When the CD4 count start coming down because they're being destroyed, you start getting what we call immunodeficiency.
Even after decades of research, it's still a puzzle with very few pieces in place and continues to perturb scientists world over.
HIV is a very clever virus. Like many viruses, actually what it's trying to do is to survive in you. It doesn't really want to kill you because it knows if it kills you, it has to go look for somebody else to infect, because it's a pure game of survival. It's trying to survive just like we as human beings are trying to survive. So it embeds itself in the cells. It embeds itself in the DNA. And in so doing, to kill it, you have to kill the cell. And ultimately, that is why some of the medicines in the past were very toxic, because they were actually attacking the cells in the person. And so it took a long time to find the correct calibration, newer drugs that were less toxic, that were more tolerable. And now the drugs are very, very tolerable.
The trajectory of HIV has changed now. Antiretroviral therapy means that the individuals with HIV can keep the virus at bay and avoid infecting others.
I remember the days when a doctor would put about 12 huge pills in the palm of their hand, and that was 12 pills every day. And now we've evolved to a single, relatively small pill every day. So now it's a pill a day keeps AIDS away, which I can tell you, having witnessed this, is a radical transformation, and I think a true testament to the tenacity of scientists in trying to find a solution to this epidemic.
But also for the good of the whole community to reduce on transmissions. If you are treated early, the earlier you start, because you reduce your viral load, your chances of transmitting will also reduce.
The more recent development in terms of treatment, newer treatment, has been a drug called dolutegravir. Dolutegravir-based regimens were better than the traditional regimens that were based on a drug called efavirenz, especially from a perspective of what you call side effects to the nervous system.
Antiretroviral therapy has saved millions of lives by stopping the virus from replicating and allowing the CD40 cells to recover, keeping the immune systems intact. But it cannot eradicate the virus from the body.
From the time HIV was recognized as a viral disease, scientists have been trying to get a vaccine.
But the process of getting this vaccine takes lots of years. So there are phases that vaccine candidates have to go through before they get to that stage where an HIV vaccine will be identified. So for this particular program, we've been involved in the earlier stages, which are phase 1 and phase 2, where we've just been testing safety and immunogenicity of a number of HIV vaccine candidates. Previous studies have shown that people from fishing communities are at risk of acquiring HIV because of basically their lifestyle, their perception of HIV, their limited access to health care, and a lot of transactional sex that takes place in these communities studies have demonstrated that the HIV rates are quite high in these communities. And when you're conducting an efficacy trial where you're now testing a product to see if it will actually protect people from acquiring HIV, you need to recruit people who are at high risk. So for this particular trial, it's a PrEP efficacy trial. We are recruiting high-risk women from fishing communities. If this cabotegravir is found to be effective and protective, then it may be one of those options in future that one can use when they want to protect themselves from acquiring HIV, as opposed to having to swallow a pill every day. Probably you'll just need to get an injection every 2 months. So I think it's a very important trial that's going to answer a very important question.
Pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, is the use of an antiretroviral medication to prevent the acquisition of HIV by an exposed person.
If you're in a relationship and your partner happens, one of you is either HIV positive and the other one is negative, again, science has given us methods to ensure that the other partner remains HIV negative.
Before you receive those drugs, we need to know what your HIV status is. Because you might think that you have just had a recent exposure, but you might have already acquired the HIV infection from previous exposures. And if you were not tested, or you were tested within window period and you were negative, and you come to receive PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis, you might already be HIV positive. If you're already HIV positive, we'll give you treatment for life.
But for those who keep on having frequent exposures, or people who are in marriage and they have sexual partners who don't accept to go for an HIV test, we encourage them to test at least once in every month to take an HIV test. That is for the general population. But for the most at-risk populations, there are those categories we call most at-risk populations. People who are having multiple sexual partners, we encourage them to take an HIV test at least once every month.
PrEP can stop HIV from taking hold and spreading throughout your body. Studies have shown that PrEP reduces the risk of getting HIV from sex by about 99% when taken daily.
Take an example, if a woman has been raped, a girl defiled by somebody suspected to be HIV positive, we encourage them to come to a facility within 72 hours. Those are 3 days, right? If they come within 72 hours, they can get a remedy. They can go through the normal processes of assessing them whether they're eligible for PEP, and we start them to have PEP, right? It can help them not to pick up the infection. But if it is beyond 72 hours, then it's no longer important.
For an HIV positive mother, again, the science enables us that first, when you become pregnant, go and test. When you know your status, you'll be put on medication. One, so that you continue to be healthy, but also two, so that you prevent your baby from getting the HIV infection. So that way, it's possible to give birth to an HIV negative baby.
The main risk for spreading HIV from the mother to the child is what we call viral load. Viral load simply means how much HIV do you have in your system, the number of viruses in your system. They remove a sample of blood, and then they measure how many viruses you have in 1 ml of blood. Yeah? So the higher the number of viruses in your body, the higher the chance of the mother spreading the infection to the baby. When the viral load is down, we anticipate that during delivery, there will be less exposure to the child through the maternal body fluids, including blood. But all the same, when the child is born, because the child will be covered with the mother's liquid, sometimes blood, during the process of cutting the cord, there might be some exposure. So we give some treatment to the baby for up to a duration of 6 to 12 weeks, depending on when the mother tested positive. That is like a prevention, like we mentioned before, post-exposure prevention. So for the baby, it is like a post-exposure prevention. So the baby receives some treatment. During breastfeeding, we keep monitoring the mother's viral load because she can still spread the HIV through breast milk.
ARVs are absolutely free. You don't pay, you don't pay anything, they're absolutely free. All government facilities and the serving NGOs, they give ARVs free of charge, right? They then go to health center, health center, first government hospitals, they don't pay anything. So they're absolutely free, they shouldn't fear.
Back in the early days of the epidemic, contracting HIV basically meant progressing to full-blown AIDS and death. But now, modern antiretroviral treatment can suppress the HIV virus to the point that it has no impact on life expectancy and even makes it untransmittable.
We still have a high number of new HIV infections every year. By the end of 2018, December 2018, we registered 53,000 new infections. Those are approximately 1,000 infections per week.
Part of the reason is because people do not yet have all the information that they need, and also they may not, perhaps because of treatment, they may not be seeing it as if it's a serious problem.
Unfortunately, the scare went away and we became comfortable.
So the question, shall we ever have a cure for HIV? I'm positive we shall have a cure.
Even so far where we are, I remember many years ago when we were talking about transmission through mother to child. We had a big number of children who are getting infected. But now, as I talk, really, we have minimally minimized infection from mother to child. If we are able to maintain our momentum, I'm very optimistic. We'll see the epidemic control achieved.
Since 2017, the President launched an initiative to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030.
And that was a very, very seminal opportunity for us because he lent his voice to the initiative, he lent his voice to the movement, and he provided leadership, the leadership that we need. He galvanized his ministers, he galvanized district leaders, he galvanized members of parliament. And so we've been using his voice to reach out to people and to drive towards ending AIDS in Uganda by 2030.